Last week I didn't put this on, and I had some people tell me I looked good, but they didn't hear nothing I said. They could just see my arms are flying. So, but Sean has reminded me today to turn it on. So, but if you go back and look at the former days, it really doesn't matter where you look at in history of mankind under the sun. There's always been sinful men, right? There's always been those who challenged the truth. And we certainly know that in the days of Christ, that they killed him, the only perfect man that ever lived. I mean, how much more sin could there be in the world than there was in the days that Christ lived upon this earth? And so I can understand the writing here very well, that there's no need to worry about the past, right? No need. And today is the day we've got to worry about. And today, or not, let's don't even use the word worry. Let's say concern. Let's be concerned about today and our eternal health going forward. And as it says in Philippians that Brother Floyd read to us last week, let's reach forward to the mark. Let's aim higher than the earthly, under the sun things. And so, when he says here, does not inquire wisely concerning this, mankind doesn't do things the way God sees things. And boy, we get ourselves in a mess. So we don't ask wisely, well, why was 20 years ago better than today? I heard on this Ukraine thing going on over there, and there's an elderly lady that lives there, and she said, I went through the same thing in the 40s. It's all come back around, the same thing. And now you go, okay, there's nothing new under the sun, right? So, let's worry about today and going forward, and not be concerned with the past, because we can't change it anyway. We can learn from it. But there were sinful men in the past just the same as they are today. That's just the way things are. Does anybody have any more comments on verse 10? Yeah.
Think about it. In the old days, yes, spiritually, I'll just be honest, those people did seem to connect to God better than they do today. But in the old days, under the sun, I really don't want to go back to, plowing a horse or
Right. A guy came in the store over there one day, and he was an elderly guy, and he said to me, boy, things are a mess in our country, aren't they? Things are really bad. He said, I've never seen times like this. And I asked him, I said, when you were a kid, did you have running water? Did you have indoor plumbing? Did you have electric lights? What kind of heat did you have? And he said, when I was a kid, our house burnt down. So there was 8 kids, mom and dad, and our house burnt. And he said the neighbors got together the next day after our house burnt and built us a house to live in. We had one room for all of us. And he said we had to carry water, we had to bathe outside, and he said, no, you're right. He said things are pretty good. So that goes right along with what you're saying. We don't want to go back under the sun. We don't want to go back. We can say, well, things were better. Electric bill was cheaper in 1975 than it is today. Well, turn your electric off if you don't want it. Nope, not going to do that. As long as we can pay the bills, right? We don't want to go back. And as far as the sins of the world, they always been sins of the world. I think the reason we pay more attention to it today is we're bombarded from every angle of telling us, if we could go back, now this is if, and I don't want to, but if we could go back to the time that nobody had telephones and the only way we communicated was writing letters and mailing them, then we wouldn't hear of all this stuff. You know, we just wouldn't. You know, you wouldn't have 200 channels on your TV and things of that nature. So, you know, there's really no need to gripe about today because we don't want to go back anyway. That's a good point, Floyd. Yeah, very, very well spoken. Under the sun. And like he said, that's the theme of this book, is how man is to live under the sun. Okay, verse 11. Let's just read 11, 12, 13, and 14, because they kind of all go together. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and by it there is profit to them that see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, and money is a defense. But the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. Consider the work of God. Who can make that straight which he hath made crooked? In the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider. God also has set the one over against the other, to the end that man should find nothing after him. Okay, now what's being said in all these verses? First of all, let's discuss wisdom just a little bit. And let's go back to Proverbs chapter 2. And I've always loved this verse when we talk about wisdom, these verses. And it's so, to me, it gives a complete description of what wisdom is. And we'll begin with verse 5. Then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord, and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. Okay, so what is wisdom? And this is my interpretation of this. Wisdom is knowing what you need to know and understand how to use it. In other words, knowledge coupled with good judgment. Does that sound right? I mean, does that make sense to everyone? If we think of wisdom as we have to know something, or we can't be wise about a situation. Brother Sean does a lot of electrical work, and he is wise in doing his electrical work. And I am unwise. I don't know. So I don't know how to apply my understanding of electric as well as does Sean. And so he knows how to do that, and I know to ask him to take care of mine. So, I mean, that's the way we work, right? So when we talk about here, wisdom is good with an inheritance. Now, I had a little problem with this verse, and I hope you all can help me out. And by there is profit to them that see the sun. Good with an inheritance. Is wisdom the inheritance he's speaking of here, or is it a physical inheritance from, say, parents or grandparents or whatever? And the reason I'm asking that is, in some of the commentaries I read, wisdom is a good inheritance. Well, how do you gain the wisdom? If wisdom is a good inheritance, how do you gain that wisdom? How do you inherit wisdom? So that's a question I have about that. And by it, there is profit to them that see the sun, or in other words, under the sun, those who live here. There's a profit. It's beneficial. It helps us to gain wisdom. Now, if we go to the next verse, verse 12, for wisdom is a defense and money is a defense. So is the money the inheritance?
I think Brother Rennie's talking more in the line, and this, as you say, is my interpretation, is he's not talking about getting it, he's talking about giving it. He's talking about giving. Wisdom is a good thing to give as an inheritance. It's to give it as an inheritance. But see, they're going to profit by your wisdom. Just like you talked about Sean, you profited by Sean's wisdom.
Right.
You know, and you didn't get electrocuted, he didn't get electrocuted. That's pretty smart in my book.
Okay.
Good with an inheritance. That means, you know, if you're gonna give them a house, tell them how to keep burning it down. You know,
Right.
now that's the way I see it.
It could be.
If I'm wrong, correct me.
Nope, I can't. I mean, I don't, like I say, it's confusing to me a little bit. I know how I see it, wisdom is good with an inheritance. If you inherit something, whether it be somebody give you wisdom or whatever, that inheritance that you have received, you have to be wise enough to use it. Right? Even if it's a gift. Right. So wisdom is a defense, and money is the defense. The word defense here is actually translated from the word shade or shadow. And when we talk about, now this is getting in an area I'm not sure I can explain it. I understand it up here, but if you have wisdom and money as a defense, then that's what you use that wisdom to control, to oversee or shadow, you know, what you're doing with it. Managing your estate, let's say, under the sun. We're talking about under the sun. So you got to be wise enough to use that. You have to be, the money is a defense because under the sun, what do we got to have? We got to have money, right? We have to have some form of barter, trade, whether it actually be American dollar or a tribe in Africa may trade one animal skin for another animal skin or food or something. I don't know, but you got to have something to barter with, something to trade with. So defense is, I mean, money is a defense. Money is a shadow that kind of oversees. And I think it's the word defense and use it as the word shadow. You know, if we're out on a bright, sunshiny day and we get in the shade of a tree, it's still not too dark. That we're still smart enough and it's light enough in that shade that we can see. In that shadow of that tree, we can still do what we got to do, right? And so when we're in this shade of defense with wisdom and money, we know how to use it. We should know how to use it. And that's the wisdom part of it. So there's a profit to them that see the sun, or those that are under the sun. If we use this money and our wisdom correctly, the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. Now, is he talking based on the next verse? Consider the work of God. Okay, that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. What is the it here? Is it wisdom? Okay, so it's a profit, right? Because it giveth life to them that have it. What kind of life is he speaking of? A life under the sun, or eternal life, or both? All the above? Maybe it's not hard to understand. It's hard for me to explain it the way I think it needs to be explained. For wisdom is a defense and money is a defense, but the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have wisdom. Is that the way you would read it?
Think of the prodigal son. He wasn't very wise, was he?
Not in the beginning.
Not in the beginning. So since he wasn't very wise, he didn't use his money wisely. If he'd been wise and used his money wisely, he wouldn't have got the mess he was in.
Right.
So wisdom is a defense and money is a defense. If he'd had money, he could have kept his life and his life would have been good. If he'd had the wisdom to start with, he would have been able to manage his money in such a fashion that he wouldn't have been in the trouble he was in.
He wouldn't have to eat with the hogs, would he?
He had to eat with the hogs.
That's a good explanation. Makes sense. So thank you all for teaching me. So consider the work of God, for who can make that straight which he hath made crooked? We studied chapter 3 of all the things that God has set in motion, chapter 1 and things that, you know, we studied the things that God has put in motion we can't change. whether we like them or don't like them. We can't change it. So when we're talking about this defense of wisdom and defense with money, consider the work of God. So can we change the system set up to use? We can't. Just like the prodigal son, he can make his personal decision to better his life or to better others. But the truth of the matter is God set it in motion that here it is. Are you wise enough to use it? And you can't change it. You can't say, okay, I'm going to listen to God. I'm going to create a whole new system. You can't do it. Can't be done.
I think that's why he calls it the excellency of knowledge. There's a whole lot of people knows that there's a God in heaven. There's a whole lot of people knows he's got a Bible on this earth we can study and do that. That knowledge is not excellent yet. What makes one wise is to apply, and that's what makes your knowledge excellent. What makes your knowledge perfect, in other words, complete, is that it's not just having the know-how, it's used.
We'll go back to Proverbs. God gives wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. If you have no knowledge of something, you're not going to understand how things are done. And we as a people here in the United States question many decisions made by our leaders. But the bottom line is we don't know the whole story, right? So for well over 200 years, we have survived with the decisions that's been made. And it's been made so good, as Floyd pointed out, we don't want to go back to the earlier days. So our condemnation of someone, when we don't know the whole story, is really unfounded. Well, why is that? Because we don't have the knowledge. We don't have the knowledge. We got an opinion, but we don't have the knowledge. So if we go back to Proverbs 2, verses 5 and 6, we got to have God give us wisdom if we got a knowledge of what it is he gives us and an understanding of how to use it. So knowledge and understanding has to be combined, right? So I think when we read this verse, consider the work of God, who can make that straight which he hath made crooked. If we don't understand the situation, there's no way for us to apply wisdom to it. Now, God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts, right? So who can outthink God? So when we take all this into consideration under the sun, we're doing pretty good, aren't we? God has given us enough wisdom, enough knowledge, enough understanding that we can survive under the sun. We can do that. So it's a good thing the work of God, what he has done for us, even though we can't say we understand it all, but we can know that it's for our benefit, right? So the system that's put in place, the way things are done under the sun, are created by God. And here's the thing that I think a lot of people in the world miss. I guess I'm getting into an opinion now, so take it for what it's worth. But when we question as Christians, when we question, is what's going on in the world today going to cause me to lose my physical life? And I think we get caught up in that. And we don't want anything bad to happen to anybody. I understand that. But as Christians, our goal is to get through this under the sun life so we can have eternal life. So we need to use our knowledge, understanding, and the wisdom we have from that to understand, no matter what's going on here under the sun, we need to set our standards, our goals higher. Press for the mark of the high calling, right? So we need to know what's going on around us. And yeah, we're going to get caught up in it and have some opinions and some ideas. But the truth of the matter is, don't lose focus on making it to heaven. It's all vanity. Don't miss the big picture. And so let's consider the work of God, because he's the one that gives us wisdom through knowledge and understanding. Proverbs 2, verses 5 and 6. Verse 14, in the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider. God also has set one over against the other, to the end that man should find nothing after him. Okay, you're prospering, you're doing good, and when I say, when we prosper, we think of, we got all these riches and all that. That's not, it don't just have to be that. We read in the New Testament to be content with what you have, right? Be there with content with food and raiment. Don't even say a house or a bank account. Just be content with what you have. And boy, I'm telling you, if we could ever get to that point in our minds and in our Christian life, that we're just content. And you know what that means when you get to that point? That means you're waiting on God. That means your patience is guiding you in the right direction. And so when we, in the day of prosperity, be joyful and enjoy. Be joyful. Now you put yourself in the writer of this book's place, and I think it's Solomon, and I think you all agree with that. But if you put yourself in Solomon's place and seeing all that he'd done, everything that God had given him, he asked God for wisdom, and God gave it to him. But God gave him riches too. And with all this stuff under the sun, that's what he's writing about, he used all that stuff and started going after strange gods through his wives. We read it in 1 Kings 11, I believe it is. And we'll go back and read that when we get a little bit further down the chapter. But if you put yourself in his spot here, when he's in the day of prosperity, be joyful. He's seen everything. He's seen the richest, the most powerful. He's seen the weakest. He's seen the poorest. He's seen it all. And it applies to all. God's word applies to all. So in the day of prosperity, be joyful, even if it's just food and raiment. If that's your riches, if that's your prosperity for this day, go back to verse 10. Don't be griping about the past. Okay? So if we can convince ourselves that God is right, then all this works. It works God's way. It works. But in the day of adversity, consider, okay, things ain't going well. Things are rough. I see, and Brother Philip mentioned this in one of his classes not so long ago. At the time when people need God the most, they leave. Why? So consider, in the days of adversity, when things aren't going exactly the way you want them to go, the troubles you face, the heartaches, man, there are heartaches after heartaches. You're concerned about your children, your grandchildren, your other family members. Where are they at? Are they okay? What are they doing there? Are they going to make it home safely? I remember when my kids were at home and they'd get in a car and go to town to buy a hamburger. I'd be scared to death till they pulled back in the driveway. My most happy time, my most contented time was when all my family was under the roof together. Didn't need no riches. I didn't need anything. My wife was there. My son was there. My daughter was there. Everybody was safe. I'd come home off an evening shift. I'd walk down the hallway and I'd look in the room, and there my son would be in the bed asleep. I'd walk down to the next one, look in. My daughter was in there asleep. I'd go in, get in the bed with my wife. We're all okay. We're all safe. We're all good. But there was a time that we didn't have very much. And I told you about that a few weeks ago. We're down to $5.13. But we were all okay. So when things are not going exactly the way you want them to, that doesn't mean that you got to turn away from God. Don't ever turn away from God. And there's so many challenges. And you know, many of the things that I've seen on the news about this war in Ukraine, I've heard some people talk about prayer and about God bless you and, you know, hope God will be with you and you be safe, or what, talking to the people in Ukraine. And I've heard many reports on the news media about the people in Ukraine singing the national anthem of Ukraine. Have you seen anybody talking about going to churches in Ukraine or asking God to guide them through? I mean, it's just not that much in it. In the day of adversity, consider that war may not always be over there, folks. Okay? So we need to understand today that in the days of our adversity, even though we're joyful in the days of our prosperity, but in the days of our adversity, whether it be a death of a loved one, a heartache, someone sick, you know, cancer, whatever it might be, heartaches, concern about the health of others, and all of that, we need to consider God. Don't ever forget God. Don't run out on God when you need Him the most. That's the wrong time. There's no good time to leave God, don't get me wrong. But if everything's going well, you're happy as a lark, man, everything's okay, everything's just hunky-dory, and then all of a sudden here comes a day of adversity. Well, I ain't going there no more. God ain't taking care of me. I'll just walk away. Wrong. That's the time you need Him most. Don't ever walk away, even in the days of adversity. God has also set one over against the other. One against the other. The good times, the bad times. Why? Why would He do that? Huh? How can you enjoy the days of prosperity if you had no adversity? You ever stop to think about that? What if everybody in this room was exactly the same? What if everybody here thought exactly the same, ate exactly the same things, dressed exactly the same way, done everything exactly the same? What would you know if someone was telling the truth or telling a lie? If everybody's thinking the same way. Hey, you know this guy up here's teaching the truth. If you're thinking like this guy. So you got to understand. And when someone challenges, whether it be me or Philip or whoever's teaching, or someone in, you know, if it's flip-flop the other way, whatever it may be, it's set one against the other, the good times and the bad times, the get-along times, the adverse times when we don't get along. That's still not a time to quit on God. To the end that man should find nothing after him. Under the sun, rich or poor, powerful or not, strong or weak, when it's all said and done, where do we all end up? In the grave, right? So under the sun, there's nothing to rejoice about, nothing to complain about, because the truth of the matter is, if we're serving God and we enjoy what He has given us in the days of prosperity, if we trust in God in the days of our adversity, in the end, we're all dead. Sounds cold, hard way to tell it. I understand that. But under the sun, it's all done. So we need to consider the work of God in verse 13. In all the things we do. Because when we're gone from this earth, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what we left behind. We don't know where we're going. What's going on after we left. What happened to my brand new car? What happened to my bank account? What happened to my favorite walking stick? Whatever it might be. What's going to go on with it? Not going to matter. So we need to understand. And I think this writer of this book has seen from his own way, his own life, the way he lived his own life, he sees this. But even more than that, of all the places he'd been and all the things he'd seen of others, he's seen how they lived. So there's not anything under the sun that this man who wrote this book, inspired of God, but the man who wrote this book is saying, listen, it's all vanity. It's troubling to the spirit. But if we consider God's work, what He has given us, that's why we're here now, because God has given us the ability to be here. God has given us His Word to study. God has given us a hope through His Word. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. So, we're not going to find nothing after we're gone that belongs to us, right? Under the sun. Under the sun. Okay. If you consider the first 14 verses of this chapter, it's a counsel for better living, if you will. And I'm borrowing that from someone else's comments, okay? The rest of the chapter is instructions for a Brother Floyd.
Yeah, going back to what you were talking about there, in the latter part of that 14th verse, so that man can find out nothing that will come after him. I can't help but think of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man, in other words, while we are on this earth, we have an effect on things that are happening on this earth. After we depart this earth, we have nothing to do with the things that are going to happen here, just like the rich man wanted someone to go back and warn his brothers. No, that's not in the plan.
Right.
In other words, if we're going to do something, do it now. Not plan that after you're gone, you can have any kind of an effect. Some people talk about that the relatives talk to them after they're
Yeah.
dead and this. No, that
No.
don't happen.
No, it don't. You're right. That's a good point. We get caught up in things. Years and years ago, when I was a relatively young Christian, someone come to me and told me that God told him to do this and God told him to do that. And I said, God never told you anything He didn't tell me. And they said, well, that may not be true. And I said, okay, He give us the Holy Bible. And out of that Holy Bible is the instructions for all mankind, because He's not a respecter of persons, right? So whatever He tells you, He tells me. I have the opportunity to know what God wants me to do. You, same as you. Okay? All equal. Okay? And this guy said, well, he told me to give this. I said, listen, whatever you learned out of the Scriptures may influence your desire or your need to give. But it's not different than what he told me. You got your idea to give or to help, whatever it is you're going to do, out of the Scriptures. And yeah, that's right. He said, I agree with that. So what we learn here, we need to teach now. Not, well, when I get to the grave, I'm going to send a message back and I'm going to tell them if it's true or not true. All right? You get to the grave, you're done. And that's what he's telling us here in verse 14, right?
Well, work while it's yet day, for night falleth when no man can work.
Yeah.
I think that's what that verse calls.
Could be. I think it's amazing how simple God has made things for man to enjoy life. And we just keep making it harder and harder on ourselves. What would be, and I've done this, going back to what Floyd was talking, if you're going to do something, do it now. Don't wait till you die and think you're going to do it then, because you're not, just like the rich man. He's not going to go back and teach his brothers, right? Lazarus is not going to go back and teach his brothers. What did Abraham tell the rich man? He told him Moses and the prophets. In other words, the scriptures is what's going to tell him. If one dies and goes back, the rich man says, they'll listen to him. Well, there's one died, went back to heaven. Are you listening to him? So when we're here, you have opportunity to teach someone. Now, I've had opportunities and passed them up. I'm not going to stand here and lie to you and tell you every opportunity I've had to speak to someone about God, I've took it, because I haven't. Now, I do it more and more and more now than I used to. But Floyd brings up a real good point. Don't put off trying to save someone's soul. Talk to them now about the future. Well, it looks like we're about out of time. Okay, 15 through 29. And we'll begin there next Sunday, God willing. This is like a counsel for how to live, or a better way to live, to kind of ease the pressure. When we get down to verses 26 through 29, there's some things there that's going to really apply to you and me. I think they're really going to get right into our kitchen. Not saying the rest of it hasn't, but I think if you stop and think about there's nothing new under the sun, and you think about the writer of this book, what all he has seen, what all he has done, if it is Solomon, you go back and read 1 Kings 11, I think that's right, and about what all he did to displease God. He's writing about you and me too. So hopefully it'll help us to be more wise in the decisions we make in the future. Anybody got anything else? Any questions or comments? Thank you all so very much for helping me. Thank you very much.